We might be a small island, but we've got a big history. Everywhere you stand, there are worlds beneath your feet. And so every year, hundreds of archaeologists across Britain go looking for more clues. Who lived here, when, and how?
You can even see the architecture of the bone inside the jaw there.
Yes.
Archaeology is a complex jigsaw puzzle, drawing together everything from skeletons to swords, temples to treasure.
And it's still sharp.
From Orkney to Devon, we're joining this year's quest on sea, land, and air. We'll share all of the questions and find some of the answers as we join the teams in the field, digging for Britain. The further back in time we go, the more rare those glimpses of our ancestors become. Tonight, we're going into deep prehistory, and this is where archaeology really comes into its own. With no written records, those pieces of evidence that we pull out of the ground are the only clues we have to the mysterious world of prehistoric Britain. I'm on a journey through a million years of history that will take me from Orkney to the south coast. I'll be discovering art made by Ice Age Britons.
Is this a leg down here? Is it coming down to a leg?
Yeah, that's right. The leg's here.
And seeing how farming first developed here.
See some more teeth sticking up here.
Yeah.
I'll be finding out how the sea holds clues to the birth of trade. And as we travel through time, we'll see how a culture emerged that still resonates today.
So when was she found?
Our journey begins before Britain was even an island, when a broad river flowed through East Anglia. And this is where archaeologists are trying to find out when the first people arrived in Britain.
For over 200 years, archaeologists have searched these lands for signs that early human species may once have lived here. But the first humans to have emerged from Africa were tropical. They just weren't adapted to cold climates, and they could not have survived in Northern Europe.
Now, on this beach in Norfolk, archaeologists are finding remarkable evidence that may challenge this belief.
I've been following this project for years, and the archaeologists are about 3 weeks into this year's dig, so I've been really excited about coming here to find out how they've been getting on.
The team are part of an internationally renowned project searching for clues that will help them date this site.
So Nick, you're a few weeks in.
Nick Ashton of the British Museum is leading the excavation.
And what sort of evidence are you finding in these ancient river sediments?
We're getting pollen from these fine-grained sediments, we're getting wood, we're getting other plant remains, little seeds. Also getting beetles, and they're very good for reconstructing climate. And on top of that, we're getting animal remains, animal bones and teeth, and they really help with the dating of the site.
To retrieve that evidence, every bucket load excavated must be painstakingly examined.
So it's all happening down here. What have you got for us, Sophie? Nothing at the moment.
Not much.
It wasn't there.
Oh, wow. Some pebbles.
Some pebbles at the moment, so each sieve load is checked and sorted,
Yeah.
and there doesn't appear to be anything in that.
Over a 5-year period, they've sifted through 70 tonnes of sediment. But sometimes it's the most unlikely finds that provide vital clues.
Oh no, pine cones.
Ah, oh right. And there, it's quite a weathered but surviving pine cone.
Really?
Part of one, yeah. You could look at the structure of that and confirm the exact species.
When you're looking this far back in time, even a single find like this pine cone core is crucial. Find by find, the archaeologists can reconstruct this mysterious lost world. A pine forest that was inhabited by creatures no longer seen in Britain. Simon Parfitt from the Natural History Museum
is an expert on prehistoric mammals.
And what's that in that box down there?
Okay, this thing is
It looks like a
incredible.
stone.
It looks like a stone. Believe it or not, it's a hyena dropping. This is fossilized hyena poo.
So we know there were a hyena here as
There
well.
are hyenas, so you've got large carnivores. We've got this fantastic rodent, jaw, with some of the teeth. And this is an extinct beaver-like rodent, and it was semi-aquatic, living along the banks of the river.
It's such a beautifully preserved fossil. I mean, you can even see the architecture of the bone inside the jaw there.
Yes, yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
It's because we know when each of these species became extinct that these fossils are helping us to date the site.
This is a tooth of a mammoth, and this is in fact one of the earliest forms of mammoth that we find in this part of the world. This helps us with the date because this is quite primitive. So we have a fantastic record.
You can tell that from the teeth.
That's right, yeah. It has very distinctive teeth. You can see this is the chewing surface, and you have a series of plates, and they're very widely spaced. And this is a feature of primitive mammoths. Later mammoths, the plates tend to get closer together, the enamel gets thinner. So that's one of the features we can use to identify it.
This tooth belonged to a type of mammoth that died out over 700,000 years ago. So its position in these sediments gives another vital clue to the archaeologists.
With the various types of dating, we're able to say that the site dates somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million years old.
So that's the date of those sediments that we're looking at in the trench, between 800,000 and 1 million years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. This project really is unique. So many important discoveries are made by pure chance, especially in prehistory, where something might be found in a quarry or when a road is being built. But here the archaeologists have set out to find something new, to make an important discovery. And they've done it.
Because what's being found here are not just animal and plant finds. It's not just evidence of a vanished landscape from perhaps 1 million years ago. There are finds suggesting humans could have lived here then too.
Actually, today we recovered one of the rare artefacts that we're also getting from the site, and this is really exciting because it shows that humans were living here at that time.
This is just coming out today?
This is a small flake, it's slightly broken, but you can see all the tell signs of human manufacture.
This tiny object is a waste flake left over from making flint tools.
So this is evidence of humans in Britain going back possibly 1 million years.
Yeah, and so it makes it by a long way the oldest site in Northern Europe, the oldest human site in Northern Europe.
So I'm holding in my hands a piece of evidence of the earliest humans to inhabit this island going back nearly 1 million years.
They've found over 70 pieces of flint, which show signs of human working. And amongst them are even some intact stone tools.
This, we actually nickname this the butter knife because it's so pretty. But you can see all the evidence of human working there, that bulb with percussion rings coming out from that characteristic rippling. And actually on this piece, they've modified that edge. It would certainly be ideal as some sort of, for cutting meat.
Yeah.
So this is the original sort of knife and fork of the old Stone Age.
And it's still sharp.
And after 800,000 million years.
No human remains have yet been found to confirm who made these tools. But it was a truly ancient species, some 750,000 years older than even the Neanderthals.
So Happisburgh has pushed back the earliest human occupation of Britain by at least 200,000 years. But what's really remarkable is that the humans living here back then were surviving in extremely harsh conditions.
At this time, Britain was approaching an ice age. How did these early species manage to survive here? Were they more advanced than we've previously thought? These are the questions now facing experts like Chris Stringer from the Natural History Museum.
So what were those capabilities? Did these people have control of fire? Did they have clothes?
Whether they had clothing, whether they had the use of fire, we can't tell from here.
They must have had ways of keeping warm.
Well, that's right, yes. I mean, the environment was comparable to, say, southern Scandinavia at the present day. And yes, I think, you know, stick us in the winters in southern Scandinavia today and we would have problems coping. So we'd have to imagine, probably, that there was at least basic clothing and probably the use of fire. But the evidence has yet to be found.
It does make us look again at these earlier human species, and perhaps they were more sophisticated than we've given them credit for.
Yes, that's right, yeah. Their capabilities were far greater, and that's really exciting. So we have to make them, in some ways, certainly more like us than we would have believed.
We know there were people here in Britain nearly 1 million years ago. They were surviving in incredibly cold conditions. It gives us newfound respect, I think, for those earlier human species. And at the end of the day, it's those insignificant finds that archaeological revolutions are made of.
We don't know how long those people survived here, but they were eventually wiped out by the vicious climate. For hundreds of thousands of years, Britain went through some of the most violent climate changes in world history, which repeatedly forced people out. So these were not our ancestors. To find them, we have to go forward hundreds of thousands of years to the end of the last ice age, and to a site in modern-day Nottinghamshire where they once lived.
It wasn't until around 13,000 years ago that Britain became recolonised by modern humans, Homo sapiens, people like us. And this time, they were here to stay. And they were living in caves like these at Creswell Crags at the end of the last ice age. We know that these people were physically identical to us, but archaeologists are relentless in their search to find out just how similar they were to us in other ways, searching for those elusive things which let us feel truly connected to them.
Cave art can speak to us like nothing else, a distant echo from an ancient world with no written language. And since the discovery of the famous Lascaux rock art in France in the 1940s, the hunt has been on to find similar rock art in Britain.
Archaeologists scoured the walls of caves like these, but found nothing. And they put that down to Britain being such a challenging environment back then, that people were just surviving, clinging on to existence with their fingernails. They didn't have time for frivolities like rock art.
That belief was turned on its head by discoveries made in this cave, where I met Ian Wall. He's an archaeologist and director of Creswell Crags.
Thank you.
So you're now standing at the level that we think our prehistoric ancestors were, sort of 12, 13,000 years ago. So it's the best place to actually view the rock art that they were creating.
So I can see a few scratches on the walls here.
Yes. Would you like to come and stand here and I'll show you. This is one of the first figures that was discovered in 2003. But you can just pick out some fainter engraved lines here.
At first, I struggled to see what Ian was seeing. Gradually, an image emerged.
This is the top of a neck of an animal.
Yeah, all right, you're convincing me.
And the ear.
And coming down here,
that's right.
A mouth.
That's right, yes, yes, and that's the chin running underneath, yes.
Is this a leg down here? Is it coming down to a leg?
Yeah, that's right. The leg's here, and then the underbelly of the animal.
That's remarkable.
There it was, appearing right before my eyes, the image of a deer. we can imagine perhaps how important this creature would have been to our ancestors. It was almost certainly one of the things that kept them alive.
So how do you know that that is Ice Age?
Crucially, you get these deposits of flowstone. It's redeposited calcite, and that forms a thin skin of deposit, and sometimes that lies over the top of these engraved lines.
That's this white area
That's
here.
right, yes. And that can be dated fairly precisely with a technique called uranium series dating.
Right, so if you can date that flowstone, then if the engravings are underneath it, they must predate it.
That's right, yes.
So how old is that flowstone?
So it's roughly around 13,000 years old.
So we really are looking at Ice Age art.
Yes, that's the clincher.
This is the oldest rock art to be found anywhere on these islands.
So much of archaeology is about how people live their lives in quite a mundane way, the tools they made, the diet they were eating, that sort of thing. But here we've got art, which is something a little bit different, and it does give you a real connection back to those people. It's incredibly evocative. You can imagine them in that cave making those images on the wall, and I rather like the mystery that we will never know what it really means.
I'm on my way to a dig in Orkney, where archaeologists are finding out more about early farmers and their mysterious beliefs. My destination is the tiny island of Westray, home to a site called the Links of Noltland, where one of this year's most exciting digs is happening.
Wow, what a way to see an archaeological site, this bird's eye view looking straight down on it. Looks great, can't wait to get down there. Many Neolithic sites are monumental and ceremonial. They're really impressive, but it's like going to a cathedral to find out how everyday people live today.
This site is different. I've come here because archaeologists are unearthing vital evidence of early farms. And these are the extraordinary and rare remains of a 5,000-year-old village where the farmers once lived. Archaeologists here are uncovering a remarkable story of a struggle to survive. Then as now, these islands must have felt like the edge of the world. I was given a tour around the site by Richard Strachan.
It's almost always windy in Orkney. The weather can be on your side sometimes. A little bit of rain on a site's very good as well archaeologically. It keeps the soil nice and moist, so it is challenging.
Yeah, it is like you have 4 seasons in one day. I can't believe it was raining this morning and now we've got sunshine.
It's very normal here.
Should we go over and have a look at what some of the archaeologists are finding?
The buildings are covered with a layer of ancient rubbish or midden, and it's from this that many of the signs of everyday prehistoric life are appearing.
So the whole site is basically sealed by this midden material, and this is containing the shell, the bone, all that sort of stuff. And you can see that we're getting pottery too within this. We're getting flint.
Is that a piece of pottery down there?
Yeah, this is a fantastic piece of pottery that Sean's just uncovered. You can see the wonderful decoration on it.
Because this archaeology is only centimetres below the surface, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you can see, literally, you're looking at in places it's very, very shallow.
Under the sand is the evidence the archaeologists have been hoping for. Proof that people here were growing barley, which was one of the earliest plants to be domesticated. Hazel Moore is directing excavations here.
I want to go and talk to Hazel about something rather interesting over this side of the site. What's the evidence for the barley farming?
Carbonised cereal grain coming from these midden deposits. They had field systems which run from the settlement down the slope,
Right.
And they were middening and enriching the soils there, so presumably that was for growing their crops all around the settlement.
From the field system, evidence of composting is emerging. Each layer of soil tells a story of a struggle to make farming work here.
When we actually look at the profiles, the soil profiles that, from the earliest times, what we have are cultivated soils swamped again and again by blowing sand.
So do you think this would have been a challenging environment to be farming in?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's challenging nowadays and it wouldn't have been any different then. It's light sandy soils are ideal for cultivation in that they can be worked easily and turned easily, but they're also very prone to erosion, and it's a very windy place.
The conditions here would have made it difficult to survive just growing crops. But new finds are showing that domesticated animals were extremely important to these early farmers. But yet again, amongst the seemingly mundane finds, there are marvellous glimpses of a vanished world. Emerging from the soils is something which has stunned the archaeologists. The skulls of 40 cattle built into the foundations of a wall.
How strange. Can we get a bit closer to it down there?
Yeah, you can come in and have a look down here.
This is really peculiar.
I can see a whole line of them here. This is the outer face of the wall along here, the stones, and that's the inner face there. So they're placed into the core of the wall, into the thickness of the wall.
How peculiar, because that means that they wouldn't have been visible when the building was standing.
No, they would have been placed there when the wall was being built. They would, the foundation level of the building. And you can see, I mean, how they sort of relate to each other. They've been put in sequentially, these ones, and the horns are actually overlapping on those ones, and then they've put some stones in and then some more cattle skulls all along.
It's making them part of a building. It's almost monumentalising them, isn't it?
It
it's
is, yeah.
Somehow enshrining them.
Imbuing the building with their spirit or whatever, yeah. Building them into the very foundations.
This strange discovery reinforces what the researchers have learned about the importance of livestock to those early farmers. It's easy to see why cattle were so important in this fragile and remote landscape. And it's yet another glimpse into a mysterious ancient mindset.
This is just utterly bizarre, these cattle skulls built into the fabric of a building. We'll never know exactly what they mean, but they obviously represent some complex beliefs.
The archaeologists now know that this land was farmed for around 50 generations, but eventually the struggle proved too great. Overcome by the wind and sand, they gave up and abandoned their village. It appears that the buildings were deliberately filled in with rubble, within which archaeologists found what could be a defining symbol of the farmers' defeat.
Now, of course, this is something we found last year, which really is quite unique, and we hadn't seen anything like this from the whole of Scotland before.
You brought her to show me how lovely.
Well, there she is in all her glory. I think you can take her.
Very small.
Yeah.
This tiny figurine is known as the westray wifey, and despite her homespun appearance, she may be the earliest known expression of religious identity ever found in Scotland.
She's really sweet. She's got a very cartoon-like face, hasn't she?
She has. We can just pick out that she has eyes and a very sort of curvy eyebrow.
Yeah.
And she's got this sort of a very rough mouth, but she also got arms down by her sides. In her design.
Yeah. And
given,
there's scratches
the
on the top of her head as well.
Yeah, like her hair almost.
Yeah.
Where the figurine was found makes her even more intriguing. She seems to have been carefully positioned in the abandoned ruins.
It seems like she was probably put there deliberately as a closing deposit. She was placed there.
Yeah.
And then there's no evidence that anybody ever came and did anything here again. So that was probably their way of marking the close of that settlement.
She's really sweet.
Hazel believes the wifey's placing may have been a ritual end to the farmers' long struggle.
We're actually seeing how people thought, you know, that they decided that this was a good way to close this building off at the end of the period. So it gives you much more of an insight into how people's minds worked at the time.
If the researchers are right, then the westray wifey is unique. A 5,000-year-old household goddess, perhaps.
Figurines of this type are usually thought to be goddesses or, you know, some religious deity kind of thing. Given that she's the only one that we have and we don't have widespread representations, it's hard to argue that she is definitely a goddess. It seemed that she must be representational of some concept, religious concept.
It's rather wonderful to hold this tiny little figurine. It's rather hard to know what she meant for the people that made her, but nonetheless, she's a fantastic little message from the past and utterly unique. But just days after I left the dig, a second figurine was unearthed, bolstering Hazel's belief that these may have been household goddesses. This is just the third season of digging here. Every day, more of the mysterious settlement is revealed. For thousands of years, people had buried their dead in communal graves. Then around 4,500 years ago, something changed in that time-honoured ritual, and people began to be buried in individual graves, something which seems much more familiar to us today. This is Culdathal Man. He was discovered in 1975, and he had been buried in the new way.
This is very well preserved, considering this is a 4,000-year-old skeleton.
His skeleton is curated by Alison Sheridan. In his grave, archaeologists found a beaker, a distinctive clay pot that was the symbol of this new burial style. We know that beaker burials started on the continent, but once they arrived here, they spread rapidly throughout the country. And the question that has perplexed archaeologists for 150 years is how that beaker culture spread so far, so quickly. Now a team of archaeologists is using cutting-edge science to work that out. They want to know if it was just the ideas that travelled, or if the people did too. Janet Montgomery and Jane Evans are analysing the isotopic signatures of beaker skeletons like Culdathal Man to find out where they lived and whether they moved during their lifetimes. To do that, they must painstakingly extract some tooth enamel from each Bronze Age individual.
Well, we only need a very small amount, less than a match head size of tissue, but you have to make sure when you take it that it's not contaminated. It has to be cleaned, it has to be carefully removed so you don't mix up the tissues, and that it's free from any contamination from the burial. What we want to do is take something that tells you about the person when they were alive, not what's happened during the time their body's been buried in the ground.
Chemicals in each sample tell us where that person grew up. We know where they were then buried, so we can tell if someone moved during their lifetime or if they stayed in their childhood home. Janet and Jane have analysed over 250 beaker skeletons in this way. The project has been 5 years in the making. It's the biggest ever survey of our prehistoric ancestors. And Culdathal Man is the latest to join it. His teeth were in such poor condition that Jane had to use a different technique to extract the sample.
These teeth have got almost no enamel remaining on them. So what I did, instead of slicing the tooth up, I had to pick off very carefully with forceps small fragments of the enamel.
Jane managed to obtain a sample, but once she got the results, she was convinced there had been a mistake.
It was only after I got the enamel results in triplicate that I was convinced and happy enough with the result to tell everybody else what we'd got.
The analysis has been carried out here at the British Geological Survey, and after 5 years, the researchers are just beginning to bring all their results together and draw some conclusions.
I wonder how our man from Culduthel has done.
The isotope composition that his teeth gave suggested that he came from an area of this type of rock. This area of Antrim, and it's the Antrim basalts.
Do you think he's Irish?
That is the most likely place for him to have come from.
How interesting.
Yeah. And so he managed to make it from his childhood site here to his burial site up and around here.
So around 4,000 years ago, Culduthel man moved 300 miles across the seas from his Irish home to his Scottish grave, where he lay buried in a signature Beaker burial. But Culduthel man is just one of the 250 skeletons from around the country which could explain how the Beaker culture spread.
Yeah.
What about the isotope project as a whole? What is it telling you about this period in the Bronze Age and about populations moving around?
A lot of the evidence that I've got from this project and other data, they seem to be very mobile at this time.
The survey reveals some intriguing results, showing our ancestors travelling long distances across the country. Results from Beaker burials in the Yorkshire Wolds area, for example, showed that over 50% of the individuals sampled had moved there from somewhere else. Some from as far afield as Scotland. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you tend to think that people in these prehistoric societies were perhaps a lot more settled than that.
The further back you go, the more settled they were.
Yeah,
It doesn't work that way.
No.
This project is really interesting because of the scale of it. They've looked at 250 individuals, and that means we can start to answer some of those big questions about the population of Britain during the Bronze Age. I'm on my way to meet a group of amateur archaeologists who are uncovering a remarkable story about Bronze Age Britain. 4,000 years ago, these waters would have been buzzing with ships. Bronze Age Britons were travelling and trading the length of this coast. I'm heading towards a site that has yielded a treasure trove of beautiful objects and vivid proof of the early importance of trade and the risks that traders ran. We're about half a mile off the coast near Salcombe in South Devon. We're approaching really carefully because there are divers down there at the moment. Hello.
Hi. Hello, Alice. Hello.
Hello. Hello. These aren't professional archaeologists, they're divers who've found a love for history, and for me that makes what they're finding here all the more special. It's real dedication here. These guys are down at Salcombe every few weeks, diving in the same spot, constantly looking for new objects that are coming up from the seabed. The team dive using underwater metal detectors to scan the seabed. In the last few months, their dedication has paid off with a massive haul of objects, which have been sent to the British Museum, where they're being analysed by curator Ben Roberts.
In total, we've got over 300 objects. We're still working through them at the moment, and they're still being found. That's the fantastic thing. What's amazing about this particular collection of objects, it encapsulates where we were culturally about 3,000 or so years ago. You have swords, and this was, for your Bronze Age warrior, what you would have used in conflict against your neighbours. And we have plenty of evidence for warfare at this time. Also, you have large-scale trade. This is proper large-scale trade in commodities.
So that's the next couple of divers going down. The divers can spend up to an hour at a time underwater at a depth of 10 metres. I was talking to Jim and he said that the seabed, the sediments, the gravels move around quite a bit down there. So every time they dive, there might be something new exposed.
The group dive around once a month. Because the seabed is constantly moving, it's impossible to predict whether they'll find anything. Perhaps the most eye-catching of the finds so far examined at the British Museum is the exquisite jewellery.
Usually when we find Bronze Age gold from this time, from about just over 3,000 years ago, we find relatively simple gold objects. So for instance here, you have a fragment of what would have been a twisted gold neck ring, where you take your gold bar and you twist it. Similarly, you have gold bracelets. These are solid bar bracelets. They've just taken a bar of gold and they've just twisted it around the wrist. What this means is that these bracelets here are just far in excess of anything that had come before. Here you have 8 strands of gold wire that have been twisted on their own and then bound together to create this stunning little bracelet, which, when it came off the seabed, was just perfectly coiled. These represent the absolute pinnacle of Bronze Age gold working.
So what we've got here is this small group of divers who are spending all their free time combing the seabed down here in South Devon. And they're making really significant discoveries that are helping us to understand the Bronze Age that little bit better.
Both the divers and Ben have reached the same conclusion about why these objects are here.
Although we're still finding objects and the stories are still being written, I think this is probably a shipwreck. And I say that because we're finding things that we don't normally find on land, and we don't normally find when they've been deliberately placed in rivers and deliberately placed in bogs, as we have all over Britain.
The group have discovered one of the oldest shipwrecks in Britain. No remains of the ship itself have been found, but most of the objects were probably its cargo. But there's a mystery here too. The majority of the objects date to around 2300 BC, but some date to a few centuries later. Ben has been trying to work out why this could be.
I think there's only 2 ways that you can really explain why these objects ended up off the south coast of Devon in the same place. And one is a shipwreck, or maybe 2 shipwrecks, and the other one is to say, well, they were deliberately placed there. So we have this tradition in the Bronze Age of placing bronze and gold objects in special points in the landscape, such as hillsides or in bogs and springs. So it's possible that it was a combination of the 2, with one taking place slightly earlier as a shipwreck and one potentially later as a dedication. It's really hard to say.
So the objects with the later dates may have been an offering thrown into the sea in remembrance of that original shipwreck. It's a touching thought. Although the gold objects found by the divers are the most beautiful and striking, they are not the most important of the finds. Instead, it's some much more mundane lumps of tin.
These ingots that we have, absolutely the first tin ingots we've ever been found in the Bronze Age in Northern Europe. Very exciting for me, I understand, not necessarily aesthetically beautiful for everyone else, but nonetheless very exciting. The tin ingots represents this missing link in our Bronze Age world between the finished bronze objects that we have here, the bronze ingots. So it's these that represent our first evidence of the tin trade in this part of the world. So it's these, for an archaeologist, that are actually more exciting than the gold.
Archaeologists have long suspected that the southwest, with its naturally occurring tin ore, would have played a central role in supplying this raw material across Europe. This is the crucial evidence they've been waiting for, found by our amateur team.
Those bubbles coming up there mean there's a couple of divers just about to break the surface, which is very exciting. I wonder what they found. Hello, Mick.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Oh, welcome.
Did you find anything?
An old bullet.
All right. No, it's not Bronze Age, is it, Mick?
No.
It's very disappointing. Well, they didn't find anything today, but undoubtedly there's more of this Bronze Age shipwreck to come to light here. And of course, what we're looking at is a 3,000-year-old tragedy. Imagine this boat laden with tin and copper ingots making its way along the coast here, and perhaps they were just in sight of a safe harbour when disaster struck. We'll never know whether the crew managed to survive, but their precious cargo of copper and tin was claimed by the sea. We started our million-year journey with finds of rudimentary flint tools made by ancient hominins. As we've travelled forward through time to discover this complex trading society, everything has become more familiar. What strikes me is that in our prehistory are quite clearly the roots of what we think of today as our culture, our way of life. And what really brought that home were some discoveries made in the grave of a chieftain in Fort Eviat in Scotland last year. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb, he reportedly said, "I see things, wonderful things." This is what really happens when archaeologists make those amazing discoveries.
Oh my God!
Oh my God! This is the dramatic moment last year when archaeologists filmed themselves as they lifted the capstone of a 4,000-year-old tomb. It would change our understanding of how Bronze Age people buried their loved ones. After discovering the tomb with geophysics, archaeologist Kenny Brophy and his team had to wait a year to be able to open it.
Oh my God.
That's some metal.
This is cool as We might have to bleep that out.
Yes, there's a lot of excitement on site.
This is an incredibly exciting moment in archaeology, isn't it? Because a lot of archaeological excavation is about painstakingly removing thin layers of soil, very gradually uncovering things.
Yes.
This is a rather momentous uncovering of a grave. It must be quite exciting to be standing there at the time.
It was. I mean, it was really a set-piece moment. There was a real sense that we just didn't know what we were going to find, which is one of the great excitements of archaeology, of course, but this really was a mystery.
Oh, for Christ's sake, what happened?
The stone-lined grave known as a kist held many treasures, and it would prove to be the grave of a Bronze Age chieftain. But there was one big surprise. No sign of his body remained. This is really peculiar, isn't it? You've taken this stone off the top of the kist burial and you're confronted with objects which are, fantastic. You've got organic remains, but there's no skeleton.
Well, that was the thing that immediately struck us, because I imagined in my mind's eye that when the kist was opened, we would see a skeleton lying there, maybe with a nice piece of pottery next to it, and nothing I saw conformed to anything that I expected.
But the team did recover this mysterious white material.
One thing we did notice when we were digging, though, that there was a kind of white powder stuck to the side of the kist.
It was this powder that would solve the mystery of the missing skeleton.
We found out there was some kind of calcite substance which would suggest it came from bone, and that bone was perhaps broken down by body fluids that were leaking from the body, and then the bones all dissolved.
Right, so this is bone mineral, but bone mineral that's been dissolved and then redeposited inside that grave.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
And this is all that's left?
Yeah, this is all that's left. So essentially, that bag of material there is probably the only remnants that are left of the person who was buried in this kist, which is, I suppose, a sad end, really, to this person.
From almost the first moment, the team suspected they had a high-status burial, and one key find confirmed that. This magnificent dagger. This is very elaborate, isn't it?
It's a fantastic piece of Bronze Age technology involving a large blade of bronze, which is a copper and tin alloy, rivets holding it together, a bone handle, a band of gold which is holding it all together. There's wooden pins involved here as well. So this is an object that's not just about the metal of the dagger, it's about so much more than that.
This is a really beautiful, elaborate object.
The sheer rarity of these in the archaeological record suggests that what we're dealing with here is someone who was very important, and someone who this dagger perhaps was a symbol of their power and symbol of their importance. So it was entirely appropriate that when they died, that ended up in the grave with them.
After the initial discovery, it's back here at the lab that most of the work has been done to identify the objects found in the grave.
We found a group of objects that were perhaps in a leather bag, and these include these strange-looking objects here, a lump of a metallic substance, which is an iron ore called limonite, a yellow iron ore, and then it's lying on top of this stone tool, which is made of flint.
These objects served a very particular purpose in the Bronze Age.
And the combination of these two suggests that this is probably some kind of fire-making kit, a striker light that maybe was something portable that could be carried about.
And Kenny, do you think a fire-making kit like this would have been something that everybody would have been carrying around, or just particular special people?
The balance of probability is that these were objects associated with powerful people. Perhaps making fire was something that powerful people were associated with. But we can't rule out the fact that these may be everyday objects that everyone had because everyone needed fire.
We know exactly what it was used for, but we're not sure whether that use was a special, magical use, or perhaps whether it's something as ordinary as a box of matches. All we know is that the people burying this person thought he should have it with him in the grave.
Yes, yeah.
But for me, the most exciting finds from this grave are also the smallest ones.
And there they are. In amongst those objects in the grave, archaeologists also found these tiny things. They're flower heads. Now, archaeologists often find pollen in graves, but pollen could get there because it's blown in, or perhaps arrives in the grave in food and drink that have been placed in there with the body. But here what we have is actual flower heads of meadowsweet. So we know for the first time that Bronze Age people placed flowers in the graves of their dead, that flowers were part of the Bronze Age funeral ritual, just as they are today. This is a piece of meadowsweet just waiting to flower in the summer. So we know that whoever it was that was interred in that grave at Forteviot, he was buried there during the summer months. And I just find it amazing that something so ephemeral, those flower heads, have survived through thousands of years. And whilst the physical remains, the bones of that person, have long since disappeared, what we have got is the evidence of this incredibly tender act of placing flowers in somebody's grave. It's something that gives us a real sense of connection back to those Bronze Age people.
In our million-year journey, we found out that our history goes back much further than we ever thought possible. And we've seen that over time, a complex society emerged in which the foundation stones of our own can be found. We've discovered a rich culture that has developed since those Ice Age artists first left their mark in the caves.
And what this journey shows us is that our prehistory is still a part of who we are today. And it's a part of our story that's only revealed with the help of archaeology. And so the digging continues.